The heavy glass doors of the Brookhaven Police Department didn't just close, they sealed. Behind them, Sergeant Elijah Carter sat in a cold metal chair, the fluorescent lights overhead humming with a synthetic, mocking vibration. His wrists were raw where the steel had bitten in, a physical reminder of a world that had suddenly turned upside down. Outside, the rain continued to lash against the pavement, washing away the tracks of a man who, only hours ago, was considered a guardian of the nation. Now, in the eyes of the men in blue shifting papers and avoiding his gaze, he was a variable, a threat, a nameless face in a booking log. But miles away, a phone call was being placed. It wasn't a call for a lawyer and it wasn't a plea for mercy. It was a notification of a breach, not of a perimeter, but of a moral code. In the quiet darkness of a high-security office, a man whose decisions moved armies paused. He looked at a file, then at a clock. The wheels of a much larger machine were beginning to turn, grinding toward a collision that the small-town precinct couldn't possibly foresee. The officers in Brookhaven thought they were processing a routine arrest. They thought they had the upper hand because they held the keys. They didn't realize that the man in the cell wasn't trapped with them. They were trapped in a legal and moral nightmare of their own making. A truth was buried in Elijah's pocket, a military ID that had been tossed aside like scrap paper. And as the seconds ticked toward midnight, the countdown to a systemic reckoning began. Stories like this take countless hours to research, write, and structure with care. If you value stories that give a voice to people who were almost erased, or those who stood tall when the world tried to break them, consider subscribing. It truly helps me keep telling these stories of justice and human resilience. To understand the weight of what happened that night, you have to understand the man who sat in that chair. Elijah Carter was not a man of many words. He was a man of precise actions. As a Marine sniper, his entire existence was predicated on discipline, patience, and the ability to remain calm while the world screamed around him. He had spent months in the desert, draped in a ghillie suit, breathing in the dust of a foreign land to protect the freedoms of people who would never know his name. His life in Brookhaven during his brief leave was a reflection of that military precision. He woke up at 0500. He ran 5 miles. He helped his elderly mother with the groceries, and he spent his afternoons at the local Veterans Center, helping younger men navigate the labyrinth of the VA. He was the kind of man who folded his clothes with sharp corners and spoke with a sir or ma'am that wasn't subservient but respectful. He believed in the chain of command. He believed that if you did the right thing, the world would eventually align itself with you. That evening, he had gone out for a simple reason, a prescription for his mother. The rain had turned the streets into a mirror of neon signs and headlights. Elijah drove his silver sedan with the same focus he used on a long-range target, composed, law-abiding, and invisible. He was a man who had mastered the art of being unseen when necessary, but tonight, his visibility would be his undoing. He was a black man in a high-end vehicle in a neighborhood that felt he didn't belong. He didn't know it yet, but his decades of service, his medals, and his unblemished record were about to be weighed against a split-second assumption. The blue lights appeared first in his rearview mirror. Elijah didn't panic. He did what he was trained to do. He signaled, slowed down, and pulled into a well-lit parking lot. He kept his hands on the steering wheel, 10 and 2, just as the manual and his father had taught him. Officer Miller approached the driver's side window, his hand hovering over his holster. It was a gesture of aggression that Elijah recognized immediately from his time in hostile territory. "License and registration," Miller barked. Elijah spoke calmly. "Officer, my license is in my back pocket. I am reaching for it now." But as Elijah moved, the officer's partner, a younger man named Davis, shouted from the passenger side, "He's reaching. Get out of the car. Get out now." The door was ripped open. Before Elijah could explain that he was a Marine, before he could point to the military ID in his wallet, he was slammed against the wet asphalt. The cold rain soaked into his shirt, and the grit of the road pressed into his cheek. "I have a military ID in my wallet," Elijah said. his voice steady despite the knee in his back. "Shut up," Miller replied. "We've heard that one before. You fit the description of a suspect in a pharmacy robbery 3 blocks back. Silver car, black male, that's all we need." It was a lie, or at least, a convenient half-truth. The actual description was a gray SUV, but in the heat of the moment with the adrenaline pumping, the officers chose the target that was in front of them. They chose the man who didn't fight back, misinterpreting his calm as the arrogance of a criminal who thought he was too smart to be caught. The cuffs snapped shut. The metal was cold. For the first time in his life, Elijah Carter felt the sting of betrayal from the very flag he wore on his shoulder. Have you ever been in a situation where a simple explanation was ignored because the person in power had already made up their mind? At the Brookhaven station, the process of dehumanization began in earnest. Elijah was led through the booking area, his boots squeaking on the linoleum. He watched as his personal belongings were bagged, his keys, his watch, and his wallet. "Sir," Elijah said to the booking sergeant, a man named Henderson who had a tired, cynical face, "inside that wallet is my common access card. I am a sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. I'm on leave. Please check the credentials." Henderson didn't even look up. He tossed the wallet into a plastic bin. "You're a suspect in a felony, Sergeant. Your rank doesn't give you a pass to rob stores." "I haven't robbed anything. I was going to get heart medication for my mother." "Save it for the detective," Henderson said, sliding a form across the desk. "Sign here." Elijah refused. He knew that signing anything without a witness or a representative was a tactical error. This refusal, however, was framed as noncompliance. He was moved to an interrogation room, a small, windowless box that smelled of stale coffee and old cigarettes. For 3 hours he sat in silence. He watched the camera in the corner, knowing someone was watching him, waiting for him to crack, to pace, or to show guilt. He did none of those things. He sat in the center of the room, back straight, eyes fixed on the door. He used his SEER training: survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. He treated the interrogation room like a prisoner of war camp because, in his mind, that's exactly what it had become. The betrayal wasn't just the arrest, it was the dismissal. The system wasn't looking for the truth, it was looking for a closing file. While Elijah sat in the dark, the machinery of the public narrative began to churn. In the age of instant information, a Marine being arrested for robbery was too juicy a headline for the local news to ignore. By 10:00 p.m., a grainy photo of Elijah's mugshot, eyes weary, hair damp from the rain, was splashed across the local news. The headline read, "Decorated Veteran or Dangerous Deviant, Marine Detained in Connection with Local Robberies." The comment sections on social media exploded. People who had never met Elijah began to dissect his life. "They trained them to be killers," one person wrote. "He probably has PTSD and snapped," said another. The nuances of his service, the medals for valor, the lives he had saved, all were stripped away and replaced by a single, dirty word: suspect. The police department's PIO released a statement. "We are investigating a string of incidents. While we respect the service of all veterans, no one is above the law." It was a masterpiece of neutral language that functioned as a subtle condemnation. By framing it as "no one is above the law," they had already moved past the question of whether he had actually broken it. The public opinion was hardening like cement. Elijah's mother, waiting at home for her medication, turned on the news and saw her son's face. She didn't cry, she knew her son, but she felt the weight of the world tilting against them. How much do you think a person's reputation is destroyed the moment a mugshot is released, even if they are later proven innocent? The trial in the court of public opinion was followed by the cold reality of the legal process. Though this night wouldn't last forever, the hours in that station felt like years. A detective named Vance finally entered the room. He didn't bring evidence, he brought pressure. "We have a witness," Vance lied, leaning over the table. "They saw your car. They saw a man of your build. Just make it easy on yourself, Elijah. If you confess, we can talk to the DA about veterans' leniency. If you fight this, we'll make sure you never see the inside of a base again." "I want my phone call," Elijah said. "You'll get it when we're done. I want to call my commanding officer." Vance laughed. "Your co isn't coming to save you, kid. He's probably already filling out the paperwork to kick you out with a dishonorable discharge. Who wants a thief in their unit?" This was the psychological warfare of the precinct. They tried to sever his connection to his identity. They wanted him to feel small, abandoned, and forgotten. They brought in a ballistics expert who claimed that a pair of gloves found in Elijah's car could have been used to handle a firearm recently. It was junk science, vague and speculative, but in a courtroom or an interrogation room, it sounded like a death knell. Elijah stayed silent. He knew that every word he spoke would be twisted. He was a sniper. He knew how to wait for the right shot. He knew that the truth wasn't a loud noise. It was a steady flame. But as the hours stretched toward midnight, even his iron resolve began to feel the chill of the performance. The officers were high-fiving in the hall, convinced they had their man. By 11:30 p.m., the sense of defeat was palpable. The desk sergeant had officially logged the charges. Elijah was being moved from the interrogation room to a holding cell with 3 other men. The verdict within the station was unanimous. Elijah Carter was a disgrace. He was pushed into a cell that smelled of bleach and despair. One of the men in the cell looked at him and smirked. "What you in for, soldier boy?" Elijah didn't answer. He sat on the edge of the hard plastic bench and closed his eyes. He thought about the missions he had completed. He thought about the brothers he had lost in the sands of Marja. He had faced death and didn't flinch. Yet here, in a small town in Georgia, he felt a fear he had never known, the fear of being erased. The system had worked exactly as it was designed to for someone like him. It had filtered out his humanity and left only his skin color and a false accusation. He felt the crushing weight of the total defeat. There was no lawyer coming until morning. His mother was alone. His career was likely over. In that moment, the darkness of the cell felt like it was swallowing the very soul of a hero. Imagine the next 40 years of a man's life being decided in 40 minutes. That's what Elijah was facing. Even if he was released, the stain would remain. He saw his future, the loss of his security clearance, the other than honorable discharge, the difficulty finding a job, the whispers in the grocery store. This is the hidden cost of power abuse. It doesn't just take your time, it takes your future. Elijah leaned his head against the cold cinderblock wall. He remembered the oath he took, to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. He realized with a bitter clarity that the domestic enemies weren't always terrorists. Sometimes they were men with badges and no humility. Sometimes the enemy was a system that valued efficiency over equity. He felt a sense of profound isolation. He had spent his life protecting a society that, at the first opportunity, had discarded him. Then the shift happened. At 11:45 p.m., a black SUV with government plates pulled into the precinct parking lot. A man stepped out. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't a local politician. He was a man who had received a priority alert that one of his top assets, a man involved in high-level, sensitive operations, had been detained, and his emergency beacon, a feature of high-level military personnel, had been activated via his phone's last location. General Thorne did not wait for the buzzer. He walked into the station with 2 MPs behind him. The atmosphere in the room didn't just change, it froze. The desk sergeant, Henderson, who had been laughing at a joke, felt the air leave his lungs. "I am General Thorne," the man said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that demanded immediate silence. "I am here for Sergeant Elijah Carter, and I suggest you find his file, his belongings, and his person within the next 60 seconds. Henderson stammered, "Sir, he's a suspect in a felony robbery. We have protocol." "Your protocol," the general interrupted, leaning over the desk. just interfered with a man whose service record is classified at a level you don't have the clearance to even name. You ignored his ID. You ignored his rights. Now get him. Now. The panic was instantaneous. The witness that Detective Vance had mentioned. He was forced to admit under the general's icy stare that the witness had only seen a dark-colored vehicle, not Elijah's car. The ballistics were revealed to be a complete fabrication. The general didn't just demand Elijah's release. He demanded an accounting. He stood in the middle of the station as Elijah was led out of the holding cell. The transformation in the room was cinematic. The officers who had been mocking Elijah now stood at a rigid, terrified attention. The general took the plastic bag containing Elijah's belongings and handed it to him personally. He didn't look at the police. He looked only at his soldier. "Sergeant," the general said, "report." Elijah, despite the cuffs marks on his wrists and the dampness of his clothes, stood tall. "Sir, I followed all commands. I identified myself. My identification was ignored. I was denied my right to counsel and communication." The general turned to the police chief, who had scrambled down from his office in a half-tucked shirt. "You have 60 minutes to scrub every mention of this from your logs, or my legal team will ensure this department is dismantled by the Department of Justice by Monday morning. This man is a hero. You treated him like a target." The charges were dropped before the ink was dry on the general's arrival. Elijah walked out of that station not through a side door, but through the front entrance, flanked by the general and 2 MPs. The rain had stopped. The air was cool and clean. The reversal was total. The local news, tipped off by the presence of a 4-star general, was already changing their headlines. The narrative of the dangerous deviant was replaced by heroic Marine wrongfully detained. But the real justice wasn't in the headlines. It was in the silence of the station behind them. The officers who had abused their power were now facing internal affairs investigations launched not by the city, but by the pressure of the federal government. Accountability didn't come because they realized they were wrong. It came because they realized they had picked a fight with someone more powerful than them. As Elijah sat in the back of the general's SUV, he looked at his hands. They were free, but they were shaking slightly. The general looked at him and said, "On behalf of the United States military, you should never have been treated this way. Your service deserved respect." Elijah realized then that justice in this world is often a fragile thing. It isn't a natural law like gravity. It's a choice that people in power have to make every single day. If General Thorne hadn't shown up, Elijah might be in a prison cell right now, another statistic in a broken system. The story of Elijah Carter is a reminder that while power can corrupt, integrity, when backed by truth, can shatter even the strongest walls of injustice. It's a lesson that Brookhaven never forgot. They learned that a uniform doesn't make a man, and a badge doesn't make a god. But it leaves us with a haunting question. Elijah was saved because of his rank and his connections. But what about the men who don't have a general in their corner? What about the ones whose service is just to their families, their jobs, and their neighbors? If Elijah hadn't been a decorated Marine with a general to back him up, how do you think this story would have ended? And what does that say about the state of justice for the average person today? Share your thoughts below. I read every single one.